American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. My guest today is from AEM, the North America-based international trade group representing off-road equipment manufacturers and suppliers. They've recently released their AEM Ag Tractor and Combine report, and I thought that this was a good time to talk about the industry trajectory as we head into the new year. From Des Moines, Iowa, I'd like to welcome AEM Senior Vice President of Agriculture Services and Forestry, Kurt Blades. Thank you so much and welcome, Kurt. Thanks for your time today.
You bet. Thanks for having me on this morning.
First of all, let's tell me a bit about your background and how you came to your role at AEM.
Yeah, well, the best way to describe my background is I'm a farm kid from Missouri, and sixth generation farmer of corn, soybeans, wheat, and cattle. And like many farm kids, it's in your blood. You can't get it out. So although I'm not on the farm on a daily basis, I do have the good pleasure of representing the ag industry in lots of different capacities around the world. And it's, we've got a pretty daunting responsibility of feeding the current 8 billion people in the world and doing it in a way that, makes sense both economically and sustainably. So that's how I got to where I am right now. I've been in this role for about 5 years, representing arguably the most interesting part of agriculture right now, which is equipment, because of all the technology that's happening. That's what brings me to today.
That's awesome. Yeah. And the technology is just mind-blowing these days. So that's really exciting. And how does AEM serve the agriculture industry?
Well, so AEM, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, represents 5 sectors: ag, construction, forestry, mining, and utilities, and off-road equipment in all of those sectors. And you'd say, well, some of those don't necessarily interact. I'll tell you, there's a lot of farmers that have bulldozers, and there's a lot of construction people that have 4-wheel drive tractors. So there's a whole lot of interaction there. But what AEM does is we provide a unified voice for those off-road equipment manufacturers to advocate on behalf of the ag industry for issues that are pretty darn important, such as mechanization and making sure that equipment is allowed to be operated in every region of the world with good mechanization. We wake up every day making sure that the equipment is safe to operate. So we create standards for safe operation and try to remove that human error as much as we possibly can. Your listeners, if they're in the ag space, will appreciate one of the things that AEM is in charge of on a global basis is the graphical symbols. So if you know the twisty guy that's around the PTO shaft, that image is developed and maintained by the Association of Equipment Manufacturers in a way to make sure that people are safe. We keep track of images like that and make them available at no charge to all manufacturers and anyone that want to use them, just to make sure that operators are safe. That's a really easy example. But one of the other things that we do is provide good market intelligence for everyone in the industry. And that's to help our manufacturers be able to predict what they're going to be doing next year, but also to help the rest of agribusiness get a pretty good sense of what the ag market's looking like, today and moving into the future.
Right. Yeah. And when I was in college and seeing the pictures on the farm equipment, I was like, how do you get that job? That sounds so fun. So now I know who does those. It took me 20 years, but well, that's pretty cool. So you just released a report called Combine Harvesters, 4-wheel drive tractors grow despite overall losses in November. Can you explain the report and what you found?
Well, so every month for the last 30 years, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers have put out what we call the Tractor and Combine Report. And it basically shows the growth or decline month over month and year to date for tractors and combines. And we break it into 4 categories of tractors, 3 categories of 2-wheel drive. So under 40 horsepower, 40 to 100 horsepower, and over 100 horsepower. And then articulated 4-wheel drive tractors, in addition to combines. And we've been doing that for a long time. So you've got really cool trend numbers that indicate, as we've kind of learned over the last few years or last 30 years, is that as tractor sales go, so goes the ag economy. It's a pretty good indication of people's thoughts of the overall ag economy. You don't buy a $500,000 combine or articulated four-wheel drive tractor unless you feel pretty good about what your future is going to hold.
Good
So
point.
we like to use those numbers in lots of different ways. The November numbers showed overall decline, but showed some real signs of life in categories that are specific to production agriculture. As an example, under 40 horsepower tractors were actually down, and they've been down for the entire year. Down in the month of November, about 30% over last year in November, and they're down about 18% for the year. That doesn't tell the whole story because in 2021, those numbers were record high. So we're comparing growth against record high, not necessarily the whole story. That small horsepower tractor represents such a huge volume of numbers, it does skew the overall total. But the number that we like to pay most attention to is 100 plus horsepower tractors. In the month of November, were actually up 6%, and they were up about 13.5% for the year. Well, that's a traditional row crop tractor. That's a pretty good jump over solid numbers from the previous year, and an indication that the farm economy is strong and there's a lot of optimism out there in farm country.
Yeah, good points. And is this measuring both US and Canadian markets then?
So the numbers I just quoted there are the US. Canada looks very similar. For the month of November, we actually were a little bit down for the month of November, and year to date, we're a little bit off of where the US are, but they tend to track 1-to-1. Depends on the year of whether they're exactly 1-to-1. Canada is an interesting market to take a look at because, for whatever reason, whether it's timing of imports or exports, it just kind of creates some differences there. But I'd say that for the most part, I would consider the markets to be tracking 1-to-1. In the case of Canada for November, we were actually down 14%. In November, but we were up, but for the year, we're up about 2% for that 100 plus horsepower. On the flip side of that, we're actually down less in the small horsepower in Canada than we are. So, I think we're splitting hairs in terms of any major differences. They tend to look very similar.
Right. Yeah. And then you said with the sub 40 horsepower segment that it had grown fast. Was that a product of COVID? Like what's attributed to that?
Absolutely was a product of COVID. If you look at the markets that did really well during the lockdowns were things that involved people investing in their homes, whether it was, luxury goods or if you looked at Home Depot and Lowe's stock, it was through the roof. Tractors fall into that category. Pinball machines of all things were all through the roof. But people that, you usually had some disposable income, they might have been spending on a trip to Europe. Well, you can't go to Europe during COVID lockdown, so they were investing back in their properties. And what we found is that there's also some interesting fundamental shifts in the overall market with telecommuting, and there is a reversal of the urban rural split where folks are actually leaving urban areas and moving. There's actually been a nice growth in some of the rural areas. Well, all those people that move into rural areas, they kind of need something to tend the land. Then to start with under 40 horsepower tractors. So that market's been very strong around the world, and it's directly as a result of the pandemic.
Wow.
I think we're seeing the decline right now because of that demand being met in the short run.
Okay.
I believe long term, that level is going to be at a higher level because there's just simply going to be more demand for those smaller horsepower tractors as folks move out of urban areas and into some of the suburban and rural areas because they can, and we can work from anywhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so what does the increase in large machines and combines suggest for next growing season?
Well, I would like to say that it's a show of optimism. I mean, I think the predictions for net farm income in the US and Canada for 2022 are expected to be really high. In 2021, they were, record highs. So I think we're projecting, despite the well published and well felt expensive input costs, net farm income is actually still up. For 2023, it's predicted to be down a little bit, but still at a very nice level. And I think what you can say is that farmers feel optimistic about the next 5 to 10 years of their ag products if they're willing to invest in new technology of a tractor or new technology of a harvester. So it's optimism, I think, is the one word I put behind it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's great. Are rising interest rates going to have a significant impact, do you think?
Of course. I mean, it's, again, we're talking about big pieces of equipment, and that does figure into it. Um, will it affect demand long term? I think it figures into it.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is these are business tools. These are not, you have to have a harvester, you have to have a tractor if you're going to be in the farming business. And so it's figured into the input cost, if you will. But obviously that I would be remiss to say that it doesn't figure into the price, but it's not as much of a driver as it might be in something like the automobile sector, or something else that is a more of an optional purchase versus a business necessity purchase.
Yeah, makes sense. And what are you hearing from manufacturers about supply chain disruptions? I know many manufacturers that I talk to, they've abandoned just-in-time operation management. They've begun sourcing material locally or within the US
Mhm.
to protect themselves from the disruption. So what are you seeing?
Well, I think one thing that we learned in the ag industry and manufacturing in general is that our system was incredibly efficient.
Mhm.
Just in time is great when it
Yeah.
works, but
Mhm.
it's also very fragile. And we learned what that fragility means. I think every manufacturer, whether you're in the equipment business or, you know, manufacturing washing machines or, widgets, you're taking a good strong look at that supply chain and looking at diversifying your risk of your suppliers, maybe increasing the numbers so you're not relying on just one company, but also one region of the world. As an example, we do operate in a global environment, and even if you're most of the equipment may be made right down the street from you here in the United States or in Canada, but there might be that one or two part that's only able to be sourced from a particular country.
Mhm.
As an example, wire harnesses. A lot of the wire harnesses in the world on the off-road equipment come from Ukraine. Well, we all know what's been going on in Ukraine for the last year. Well, that's not a supply chain disruption we were counting on, or the sheer number of components, small, metal pieces that might be coming out of Italy. Well, and we know during the pandemic that Italy was going through rolling shutdowns here and there. So I think everyone's kind of taking a look at like, oh, do we want to rely on one country or one region of the world, especially in a time where we've got some political and other sorts of unrest that are standing in the way. So everybody's taking a look at that diversification. But also, and this is a very important part, we talk about agriculture being such a seasonal market. I mean, if you miss planting, you miss your income for a year. If you missed harvest, you miss your income for a year. And I think manufacturers of ag equipment take that role very seriously and prioritize wear parts, prioritize anything we can do to get the machines on the field in time for those critical windows, just to make sure that farmers don't miss out on their income. And that includes taking a look at their supply chain, diversifying their supply chain, and smoothing out some of those rough edges that we might have felt over the last couple of years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you kind of alluded to before, 2022 was an unpredictable year. Farms seem to sustain blows from all angles, whether it's input prices, fuel prices, supply chain, weather. Luckily, though, it was balanced by high commodity prices. So,
Right.
We came out all right. What did you see through 2022 that producers could learn from and leverage going into 2023?
Well, the one thing that I think we will see as a lasting result of 2022, 2021 with the pandemic, especially on ag equipment and capital goods in general, is that the days of going to your dealer lot and seeing 15 combines to choose from or 25 tractors to choose one and pick it for delivery tomorrow, I think those days are over.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The combine shouldn't be an impulse buy. So I think what I would encourage all farmers to do is plan ahead on their capital needs and work closely with their dealers. We're also working closely with the manufacturers. Say, what's my business going to look like 5 years from now? What do I need today? What am I going to need 5 years? And plan that out, and use that increased delivery time to your advantage, so you can make good financial and good business decisions for your operation. So that's something that I encourage all farmers to do is take a good look at their equipment needs, not just today, not just for next season, but what are they going to be looking at 5 years out? That includes the adoption of technology, which has the ability to make things a whole lot more efficient and more sustainable. It's pretty neat to work into it. And then that also includes, the immediate needs of planting and harvest. The other thing that I think we've learned during last year and during the pandemic and with all the supply chain challenges is that for a farmer to have a good working relationship with their local dealer, because you're trying to manage uptime. That's the goal. The goal is making sure that the machines are operating in that tight window. So if that means working closely to do all your preventative maintenance before you enter into the field, and that prevents some downtime 2 months from now, man, you should absolutely do that. And I think we've all kind of learned that as you plan ahead for the anticipated challenges, it makes those disruptions a whole lot better. And that's just good business sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really good advice. And I have one last question for you. Why do you personally serve the ag industry? What's your greatest passion in all of this?
Well, hopefully you can tell from this conversation, I'm kind of passionate about a lot of it,
Yeah.
but I do think a lot of us in this industry do take personally our responsibility of feeding the world. And, we've got, we all make money on this business, and that's great. But it's kind of a noble, higher calling. And I get energized when I have conversations with folks that, one positive thing that came out of the pandemic is people having a new appreciation for the food supply and where food comes from. The other thing that has happened over the last 3 or 4 years that has been energizing is the focus on farmers as being stewards of the land and being part of the solutions for some of society's greatest ills. I love that farmers are part of that conversation. We may not all agree on how we're going to get there, but boy, I love being a part of the conversation. And when you think about you can't sequester carbon without green plants, you can't really grow green plants without farmers. That gets me up every day to think, what can we be doing as an industry to tell that story better to anyone that will listen, so that we are feeding the world and we're creating a better environment, while also making a nice little lifestyle for those of us that have been in this industry our entire careers.
Amazing. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And so where can people find you? Where can they keep up to date with what AEM, the reports that are coming out regularly?
The best way to learn about AEM is to go to our website, aem.org. That's where you'll see the latest research that we have, the latest presentations, as well as some of the latest and greatest news and industry information on off-road equipment.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kurt, for joining me today. Great insight, and we're excited for 2023.
You bet. Thank you.
And thanks to all who are watching or listening. If you want to learn more, all the links are provided in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight, YouTube, Rumble, Telegram, or AgFuse channels. And the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Amazon, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And have a great day.